Let's start with the serial data transmission methods. It normally having two types: synchronous transmission and asynchronous transmission. Before start this particularly section or this particular topic, first of all, both the subsequent transmission methods use bit, that is bit synchronization. Basically, a bit synchronization is a type of digital communication in which the data circuit transmitting equipment, that is DCE, and data terminal equipment, that is DTE, and transmitting circuits are all operated in bit synchronization with a clock signal. It is also sometimes referred as digital synchronization. Basically, this type of transmission is based on two subsequent equipment or two subsequent devices, that is DTE and as well as DCE. Bit synchronization is necessary to identify the beginning and the end of the data transmission. It supports the receiving computer to recognize when data starts or begins and stops, that is ends, during a transmission. It offers timing control. So generally the bit synchronization is nothing when we can pass certain signal from one point to another point. It is either in bit or byte. In the case of bit synchronization, it necessary or it required to identify the beginning and as well as the end of the data transmission. So first of all, we should learn about the synchronization transmission. The word synchronize refers to the things happening at same time. That is, at a time, more than one things can be like transmit. This holds true for synchronization transmission within the context of the information technology. So generally, the most of particularly point to point, that is, one system can communicate with other system in the serial transmission. It must require or it must based on the bit or byte of implementation. It is basically called the serial transmission, like modes or methods. This transmission is basically defined as the process by which data or signal is transferred from one application system or device to another in a constant period or intervals using monitored by a clock. So generally, this type of transmission in which data moves in a complete paired approach, that is completely paired approach, in the form of chunks, that is small amount, or as well as frames. Synchronization between the source and as well as target, that is destination, is required so that the source knows where the new byte begins. Because it is a continuous process, there is no interval or there is no space. Since there is no space between the data, because we can directly communicate or we can directly send the message, that is say DATA, that is data. It first of all converted into the individual bits, and after that every individual bits can transfer over a particularly communication medium. So there is no space between this data while sending or receiving. This method offers real-time communication between link devices, that is source with destination. So generally, when a particularly data, that is basically like you can say the bit streams are combined into longer frames. So generally, most of bits are normally making in a frames or packet in synchronous transmission, which may contain multiple bytes. So simple logic or simple example, where we can pass certain sentence from one source to another, particularly like source to destination, it have normally multiple characters or multiple words in a single sentence. So every individual particularly word, or it may be the group of characters, are normally making a single frame. That particular frame is related with the bit stream. Each byte is introduced onto the transmission link without a gap, that is without a space between it and the next one. So it is normally called a continuous process. Take example, while writing certain particularly contents, we are normally providing a space between the word followed by the next word. But in a particular word, it does not like make or take or does not have any space in between. So the bit frames and as well as the number of bytes which is passed from source to destination, it does not contain any space or it does not contain any gap in between that. It is left to receiver to separate the bit stream into bytes for decoding purpose. So every individual particularly bit stream having certain like indication or certain recognition point where the receiver end or the receiver can distinguish about that. So data or information is transferred in the form of an unbroken string of zeros and ones. As I said earlier, it is normally called the bit stream, it not having any gap or not space in between that. So that's why it is called unbroken strings. So take a simple example. A single particular sentence having more than one words, every individual word having certain space. But in this case, entire particularly like sentence having a single string, it doesn't contain any gap or like it doesn't contain any space in between that. So the receiver normally separates that particular string into the bytes or characters it required or it needs to reconstruct the information. So in this transmission, we send bits one after another without start and stop bits or gaps. There is no start or stop bits, like that is there is no gap. Every individual character which is follows or which normally transmit from source to destination having maximum of 8 bits for a single character. Grouping of bits in the receiver's particularly responsibility. It depends upon completely depends upon the receiving end how the particularly incoming bytes or the group of bits can actually distinguish or can group. Simple example, like this particularly part having a sender, that is A, and this is the receiver. Every individual particularly signal, this is called the data flow from sender to receiver. So in this diagram, data is being transmitted from A to B, A being the sender and B being the receiver as per this particular diagram. The couple of sync, that is synchronization or sync data packets initialize the transmission process. So it having number of particularly data bits, that is bit streams, and followed by the sync, that is synchronization. The couple of sync data packets initialize the transmission process because it normally having the sync first, then after that it followed by the data. The stream packet once received by the receiver are decoded and served to synchronize the receiving clock with the sending clock. So generally, first of all, the receiving end or the receiving part are normally receive the string packs or string packets, and on the base of that particularly synchronized or string packets, it can decoding the data as per that particular string. Once synchronization is achieved, sending and receiving commands. Means after that the synchronization process is complete, or normally the synchronization if the sender's data completely arrived at the receiving end, and after that the connection or the particularly sending and receiving commands. So the characteristics, basically the first characteristics is called the synchronization transmission. Between transmitted character there is no space, like as I said here. Timing is very important as the accuracy of the receipt. It means a speculated time period, a certain time period, the data should be passed, or the particularly bit stream must be passed from source to destination, and special SYN's characters, that is string packets, are sent before the data being sent, and these particular string characters are placed between chunks of data for timing functions. Basically it is called the packets or the chunks of data for the timing functions. Some of the advantage of synchronization transmission is that data speed is much higher because there is no extra bit at the sending end and as well as the receiving end. So every individual particular chunk, that is called the frame, consisting of certain bits, that is zeros and ones. So every individual character must consist of 8 bits of particularly like 8 bits of binary character, a binary 8 bits of binary. And the next one is called timing errors are reduced by the help of or due to the sync packet. So first of all, sender must send certain sync packet or sync frames to the receiving end, which is completely based on like like timing function. So that's why the timing errors, because from source to destination there are certain time, particularly like time rates there or time particular periods there, to which the data can be communicated from one particular point to another point. It is more useful for the high speed applications. So generally most of particularly application which is related with, like you can say the chat rooms, like the telephone conversations or the video conference. These are the basic examples, or these particularly areas are widely implemented this type of particular transmission, that is synchronization transmission, because there is no delay of particularly like the communication or the delay of transmission. And some of the disadvantage, timing is responsible for the accuracy of data. In the advantage, basically time is the most important segment or most important factor for reducing the errors. So disadvantage is also there. If certain particularly like bound period or the time bound period is lapsed, then it is basically it is basically like the data accuracy is very less. So it is required that transmitter and receiver be properly synchronized. So both the subsequence and in a particularly form of the synchronized manner, because each and every particular signal or the transmission like the transmission particularly data transmission in a proper manner. And the next one is called asynchronization transmission. So in this particular transmission, data moves in a half-wave approach. That is, it not in a full-wave approach. It is a half-wave approach. One byte or character at a time. So it may be in the previous part. It normally consisting the bits of particular chunks, that is called the frames. But in the asynchronization transmission, synchronous transmission, it completely based on one particularly character or one byte at a time. It sends data in a constant particularly current of bytes. So it normally flow the character by character, that is called the byte by byte. So as you know that every individual particularly byte consisting of 8 bits. The size of the character transmitted is basically 8 bits with a priority bit or with an additional bit which is added at the beginning and as well as at the end of the particularly like transmission data. So basically there are 8 bits of 8 bits, that is one character, two additional bits can be like added in the beginning and as well as the end part of the subsequence, particularly like bit stream. So all get together, it making the total of 8 bits, that is 8 bits character or 8 bits can transmit from source to destination. It does not, particularly it does not need and the end, it does not need for the clock for integration, rather it utilizes the additional bits to inform the receiver how to translate the data. So in the previous part, that is called synchronization transmission, it only having 8 bits, that is no gap between more than one character. So it is depend upon the receiver and how the particular data can be encoded. But in this transmission mode, every individual byte containing 8 bits followed by 2 additional bits, one at beginning and one at end. That is 10 bits particularly can travel or can transmit from source to destination. So the asynchronization transmission also particularly named it like asynchronization transmission because the timing of the signal is unimportant, because there is no importance of time in this particularly sorry transmission like method. In this transmission process, transmitted information is encoded with the start and stop date, specifying the beginning and as well as end of each character. So generally the bit streams, as I say, 8 bits followed by one or two additional bits, that is one from beginning, another from end. And this is the basic example of like the asynchronization data transfer. So it having a transmitter, that is source, and another is receiver, and it normally having three segments, that is this is one, that is one followed by 8 bits of data bytes and followed by 0, that is normally another particularly bits. So in this case it normally all get together it containing 10 bits. So this one and as well as this one is called the start bit, and this particular 0 and this particular 0 is called the stop bit or the end bit. So entire particularly there is a gap between the subsequence particularly bit streams like particularly character with character. Here the data is transferred from one end to another end in the form of bytes or characters. Thus, when the transmitter wants to send data, then it has no notify to the receiver that particularly it is going to send the data bits. So for this region, before sending the actual data, the transmitter sends the start bit that notify the receiver about the transmission. So generally, start bit whenever the previous part, that is synchronization transmission, it having the string packet first, and on the receiver end, by the help of the string packet, it can actually like encoding the subsequence, particularly incoming signals or incoming data. In this case, it completely depend upon the start bit, which followed by the 8 bit character, sorry 8 bits, and followed by again particularly the stop bit. So by the help of the start bit, the receiver can understand or can recognize or can normally communicate its particularly incoming data, and after that it encoding them. And after particularly sending the data bytes, the transmission sends the stop bit. So it is basically called the request and response part, that is called the acknowledgement. So basically, thus after sending the data particularly bytes, the transmission sends the stop bit. In this diagram, this is particularly the stop bit, and the transmitter and receiver in the asynchronous transmission system have their internal clock for operation. Every individual particularly system, that is transmitter and receiver, having its own internal clock through which it can communicate. It completely not depend upon the time interval or the time particularly time bound concepts. And some of the characteristics of this particular transmission. Extra bits are added to the start and as well as the end of the character string, like it altogether 8 bits followed by one starting bit, another ending bit, all get together is 10 bits. Between two characters, there may exist gaps or space. Generally, in between, this is first particularly character and this is the second character. In between one gap or one space is there. And the third one, the idle time is not constant because it completely based on the random implementation between bytes, as only one byte is sent at a time. And the the receptions, particularly reception of data, is done at different clock frequencies. So it depends, or it not completely based on the like time bound period or the clock frequencies. So some of the advantages are, so the synchronization between devices is not necessary. So in the case of synchronization transmission, both the subsequent particular line, that is transmitter and as well as receiver, having a sync concept. But in this case, synchronization is not particularly necessary between the transmitter and as well as receiver. It is low cost scheme because it normally consisting of more than one particularly characters in a flow. So it is basically called low cost streams. So that's why it is not being widely implemented. Disadvantage, like low transmission due to the use of start and stop bits and gaps between the data chunks or data frames. So transmission rate is very low or very slow because of the start and stop bits and as well as the gaps, which is not there with the synchronization transmission. And timing errors basically take place because the encoding system is completely depend upon the start and as well as the stop particularly bits. So there are certain errors related with that. Some of the examples of this particularly like transmission, that is a synchronization transmission, is normally like you can say the email facility, the letter formats, and the forum concepts, so and so thing. Thank you.